Welcome to Haunting Tales After Dark. The night enveloped the world in its inky embrace as I embarked on the lonely drive home. The road stretched before me like a sinister ribbon, illuminated only by the feeble glow of my headlights. With each passing mile, the darkness seemed to deepen, casting eerie shadows that danced along the edges of my vision. As I navigated the winding road, a sense of unease settled over me, like a weight pressing down on my chest. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that unseen eyes followed my every move from the depths of the surrounding forest. The trees loomed ominously overhead, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers grasping for something just out of reach. The wind whispered through the leaves, carrying with it a haunting melody that sent shivers down my spine. Suddenly, a figure appeared on the side of the road, bathed in the dim glow of my headlights. My heart leaped into my throat as I swerved to avoid it, the tires screeching against the asphalt. But as quickly as it had appeared, the figure vanished into the darkness, leaving me shaken but unharmed. I tried to convince myself it was just a trick of the light, a figment of my overactive imagination. But deep down, I knew there was something more sinister at play. Something lurking in the shadows waiting to reveal itself. As I continued on my journey, the road seemed to stretch on endlessly, twisting and turning through the heart of the forest. Strange shapes flitted at the edge of my vision, fleeting glimpses of something not quite human darting between the trees. A sense of dread coiled in the pit of my stomach, as I realized I was no longer alone on that desolate road. I could feel their eyes on me, watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. With trembling hands, I gripped the steering wheel tighter, willing myself to push on despite the overwhelming fear threatening to consume me. But the darkness seemed to close in around me, suffocating me with its oppressive presence. Just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, a faint glimmer of light appeared on the horizon, signaling the end of my journey. With a sense of relief, I pressed down on the accelerator, eager to escape the clutches of the night. As I emerged from the darkness and into the safety of the city lights, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me, something malevolent and hungry for my soul. But as I glanced back at the road I had traveled, I knew one thing for certain. Some roads should never be traveled alone, especially not at night. And as I reached the safety of my home, I made a vow never to venture out on that treacherous road again, knowing that whatever lurked in the darkness would always be waiting, just beyond the reach of the headlights. I am a taxi driver. I mostly do the night shifts because where I work, there are a lot fewer cars on the road than during the day. This one night, I was driving around, waiting to see if someone wants a ride or calls the company I work for. I knew that this one bar would be closing soon, so I headed over to it when I saw this lady waiting on the side of the road. I pulled up and asked, "Do you need a ride?" She just nodded her head and got into the back of my taxi. I asked where she wanted to go, but she didn't answer my question. A couple of seconds went by, and I heard her softly say a place, so I started driving. We were almost there, but just a street before her stop. I looked in my mirror to see if she was all right. She wasn't there, so I pulled over and thought she might be laying down. I got out and checked, but she was gone. I told some people I work with, and they think I gave a ghost a ride that night. Let's just say I hope she could move on. There it was on the side of the road. This human-looking thing, but it was standing on all fours with the head of a deer. I didn't feel like sticking around to see if it was friendly. I stepped on the gas, but to my shock, it was keeping up with my car, getting ever so closer, making this noise that cracked my window. I could feel it. This is the end for me. But just as fast as it had appeared, it was gone, and I was back on a lit road. I don't know what I saw that night, but I feel if I had stopped or slowed down at all, I wouldn't be here right now. The road stretched endlessly ahead, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through the darkness of the night. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, my knuckles white against the black leather. The only sound was the steady hum of the engine, the rhythm of my heartbeat matching its cadence. I had been driving for hours, the monotony of the road hypnotizing me into a trance-like state. As I navigated the desolate highway, My mind wandered to the events of the day. It had been a long and exhausting journey, filled with deadlines and demands. All I wanted now was to reach the comfort of my home, to escape the pressures of the outside world and lose myself in the sanctuary of solitude. But as the miles ticked by, a sense of unease crept over me, like a shadow looming on the edge of my consciousness. The darkness outside seemed to press in on all sides, suffocating me with its weight. I glanced nervously at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see a pair of glowing eyes staring back at me. Shaking my head to dispel the irrational fear, I forced myself to focus on the road ahead. But try as I might, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of being followed by something unseen and malevolent. Suddenly, a chill ran down my spine as I realized I had taken a wrong turn. The road ahead was unfamiliar, shrouded in darkness and devoid of any signs or markers. Panic surged within me, threatening to overwhelm my senses. I fumbled for my phone, desperate for a signal to guide me back on course. But the screen remained blank, mocking my futile efforts. With a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, I realized I was lost, adrift in a sea of shadows with no compass to guide me home. Swallowing my fear, I made a decision to press on, hoping against hope that I would stumble upon familiar territory. But the road seemed to twist and turn at will, leading me deeper into the heart of darkness. Strange shapes loomed at the edge of my vision, fleeting glimpses of something sinister lurking just beyond the reach of my headlights. As I rounded a bend, a figure materialized in the middle of the road, blocking my path. My heart leaped into my throat as I slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching in protest. The figure stood motionless, bathed in the eerie glow of my headlights, its features obscured by the shadows. For a moment, time seemed to stand still as I stared into the abyss of its empty gaze. Then with a jolt, I realized it was no ordinary person standing before me. Its form flickered and shifted, morphing into something monstrous and grotesque. With a cry of terror, I threw the car into reverse, the engine roaring to life as I sped away from the apparition. But no matter how fast I drove, it seemed to pursue me, a relentless specter haunting my every move. Fueled by sheer adrenaline, I careened around curves and barreled down straightaways, desperate to escape the clutches of whatever malevolent force pursued me. But no matter how far I drove, the road stretched on endlessly, a labyrinth of nightmares from which there was no escape. As dawn broke on the horizon, I found myself back where I had started, the familiar sights and sounds of civilization surrounding me once more. My heart pounded in my chest as I stumbled out of the car, shaken but alive. But as I looked back at the road I had traveled, I knew that I would never forget the horrors that lurked in the darkness, waiting to ensnare unwary travelers like myself. And though I may never fully understand what I had encountered that night, one thing was certain. Some roads are best left untraveled, lest they lead to madness and despair. With a vow to avoid that cursed road, I left, determined to put the nightmare behind me and cherish the safety of my home, grateful to have escaped the clutches of the unknown horrors that lurked in the night. I need to tell someone what happened that night. I still really don't know if it was real or not, but that night will never leave my mind. So just for a bit of backstory, I am a truck driver. I usually do the early shifts, but one of my co-workers was out sick, and they needed someone to cover for him. Well, I took it. I could use the extra pay, so they gave me the details for where I was going, and this was going to be a long one. I went and got some energy drinks and some food for the drive. I knew there were stops in between, but I felt good that night that I could make it. So it starts out like every other night. Listening to some music, having some of my coffee. I was on the highway for a couple of hours. I needed to stop at a rest stop, so I found the closest one. Oh boy, was that not a good plan? I pulled in, and the place was dead except for my truck and one other car. So I went in and did what I had to do, and was about to get back in my truck when I saw this guy hiding just behind it. I was thinking, okay, that's weird. He was not looking my way, just looking into the trees. I looked around, and the other car that was here is now gone. Maybe this guy got left behind. I don't know, something was off with this person. I just could not put my finger on it though, but I had a bad feeling. At this point, I have been looking at this guy for a good bit, and I have yet to see him move. Well, I said I have to get him to move so I can leave. So I walk over to him and said, "Hey buddy, are you all right? If so, can you move so I can leave?" I am on the clock. He did not even look at me, or even act as if I did not say anything, just standing there staring at the woods. The closer I got to this person, the more scared I felt, like they were making me feel fear. Well, I just walked up to them. Now I am so close I can smell him. He smells like old meat if you left it out for weeks. I went to put my hand to touch him, then he quickly looked at me. This scared me. I jumped back, but when I looked at him, he was not human. He was more like a monster. I can say the next part makes me sick to think about, but let's just say you'd be running for the hills if you see this man. So I got up and got into my truck as fast as I could and pulled out of there so fast. I looked back in my mirror and saw no one there at all. Let's just say that I will not be stopping at that rest stop anymore. I'm going to tell you about something that happened to me one night when I was driving home from work. I looked at my GPS and it said there was an accident on the route I usually take, so I had to do something I don't like to do. Take the back streets. Now, most of you might be thinking, what's wrong with that? Well, it's really dark, and the road itself isn't that big. There are only 2 lanes and not much space on either side. So I just drove slowly, hoping that if a car came and they were going fast, maybe I could move to the side faster. But this night, another car was the least of my worries. I started the drive down the back streets, and it started out fine. Just your typical drive home. But then, in the distance, I swear to God, I saw a kid walking into the woods. I thought it was just my imagination playing tricks on me, until I got up to the spot where they walked into. I came to a stop and grabbed my phone, shining my light into the woods. I stayed there looking for a good 10 minutes. I was about to leave when I saw them. 3 kids hiding behind the trees, but they didn't look right. Their eyes were all black and their skin was pale. They were getting close to my car. Finally, I snapped out of it and got out of there as fast as I could. Or just know, I'll never be going down that road at night again. I've always had a deep connection with nature, drawn to its raw beauty and untamed wilderness. So when my friends suggested a camping trip deep into the heart of the forest, I eagerly agreed. Little did I know, that decision would lead to a terrifying encounter that still haunts me to this day. It was a crisp autumn afternoon when we arrived at the trailhead, our backpacks filled with supplies and our spirits high with anticipation. The forest stretched out before us, a sea of green and gold, beckoning us to explore its secrets. We followed the winding trail deeper into the woods, the trees towering overhead like ancient sentinels, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. As night began to fall, we found a suitable clearing to set up camp. The air was cool and fragrant, filled with the scent of pine and earth. We quickly got to work pitching our tents and starting a fire, the crackling flames casting dancing shadows on the forest floor. As darkness descended, the forest came alive with mysterious sounds: the rustle of leaves, the hoot of an owl, the distant howl of a coyote. But we were undeterred, lost in the warmth of a fire and the camaraderie of good friends. As the night wore on, however, a sense of unease began to creep over me. It started as a feeling of being watched, of unseen eyes peering out from the darkness. I brushed it off as jitters, blaming my overactive imagination. But then the shadows began to move. At first, it was subtle, a flicker of movement out of the corner of my eye, a shifting of darkness among the trees. I tried to ignore it, to focus on the conversation and laughter of my friends, but the feeling of dread continued to gnaw at me. And then, without warning, the forest fell silent. The crackling of the fire died away, replaced by an eerie stillness that seemed to suffuse the air like a thick fog. My heart pounded in my chest as I glanced nervously around the camp, searching for any sign of movement in the darkness. That's when I saw them, the shadows, creeping closer, their forms indistinct and shifting. They moved with a sinister grace, slithering through the underbrush like serpents in the night. I tried to cry out a warning to my friends, but my voice caught in my throat. They too had noticed the encroaching darkness, their faces pale with fear as they watched the shadows draw nearer. And then they were upon us. The shadows swarmed into the camp, enveloping us in their cold embrace. I could feel their icy touch against my skin, sending shivers down my spine. My friends and I huddled together, our backs against the fire, our makeshift weapons trembling in our hands. but it was no use. The shadows were everywhere, surrounding us, suffocating us with their malevolent presence. And then, just as suddenly as they had appeared, the shadows retreated, melting back into the darkness from whence they came. We were left shaken and bewildered, our minds reeling from the encounter. We wasted no time in packing up our camp and fleeing into the night, desperate to escape the haunting shadows that lurked in the wilderness. As we stumbled back along the trail, the darkness seemed to press in around us, as though the forest itself was alive with unseen eyes watching our every move. When we finally emerged from the wilderness, the first light of dawn breaking over the horizon, we breathed a sigh of relief. But deep down, we knew that the shadows would always linger in the corners of our minds, a reminder of the terrifying night we spent in the wild. To this day, I cannot explain what we encountered in those woods, whether it was a trick of the light or something more sinister. But one thing is for certain: the wilderness holds secrets that are best left undisturbed, lurking in the shadows, waiting to be discovered by those foolish enough to venture into its depths. I've always been drawn to the wilderness, the untamed beauty, the sense of freedom it offers. But one camping trip changed everything for me, leaving me with a chilling tale that still haunts my dreams to this day. This is the true story of my encounter with the unknown deep in the heart of the wilderness. It was a crisp autumn weekend when my friends and I decided to venture into the remote wilderness for a camping trip. We were seasoned outdoorsmen, or so we thought, armed with our tents, supplies, and a sense of adventure. Little did we know, the wilderness had plans for us that went beyond our wildest imaginations. As we ventured deeper into the woods, the dense canopy above blocked out the sunlight, casting eerie shadows that seemed to dance around us. The air was thick with the scent of pine and earth, and the only sounds were the rustling of leaves and the occasional chirping of birds. It was the perfect setting for an adventure, or so we thought. We found a clearing near a babbling brook and set up camp, the crackling of the fire providing a comforting warmth against the encroaching chill of the night. We laughed and joked, swapping stories beneath the starry sky, oblivious to the darkness that lurked just beyond the reach of our campfire's glow. As night fell, a sense of unease settled over our camp like a heavy blanket. The woods seemed to come alive with strange noises, branches creaking in the wind, animals rustling in the underbrush. But it was the howling that sent shivers down our spines, a mournful sound that seemed to echo through the trees, chilling us to the bone. At first, we tried to brush it off as nothing more than a trick of the wind, but as the howling grew louder and more persistent, we knew there was something out there in the darkness, something that did not belong in this world. I remember the fear that gripped my heart as the howling intensified, its eerie wail sending a primal chill down my spine. It was as though the very woods themselves were warning us of an unseen danger, urging us to flee before it was too late. But we were foolish, too stubborn to heed the warnings of the wilderness. We huddled together by the dying fire, clutching our makeshift weapons as though they could protect us from whatever lurked in the darkness. And then it happened. Out of the shadows emerged a figure, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. It moved with an unnatural grace, its movements fluid and silent as it prowled around the edges of our camp, watching us with a predatory gaze. I remember the fear that gripped my heart as I watched the figure draw closer, its features obscured by the darkness. It was like something out of a nightmare, a creature born from the darkest depths of the wilderness. As it drew closer, the howling grew louder, filling the air with its mournful sound. It was as though the creature was calling out to its kin, summoning them to our camp with its chilling cry. With a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, I knew we had to leave, to flee into the safety of the night before it was too late. But as we scrambled to gather our belongings, the figure disappeared back into the darkness, leaving us alone with the howling of the wilderness. We fled into the night, our hearts pounding in our chests as we raced through the darkness, the howling growing fainter with each step we took. And as the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, we emerged from the wilderness, shaken but alive, our minds haunted by the chilling encounter we had just survived. To this day, I cannot shake the feeling that we were not alone in those woods, that something sinister still lurks in the darkness, waiting for its next unsuspecting victim. And as I lie awake at night, listening to the howling of the wind, I can't help but wonder if the creature we encountered that night is still out there, prowling the wilderness, waiting for the perfect moment to strike again. This story I'm about to share with you still sends shivers down my spine every time I recall that chilling night deep in the heart of Whispering Woods. It was a camping trip with my closest friends, an adventure we thought would be filled with laughter and camaraderie, but it turned into a nightmare we'll never forget. We set out on a crisp autumn day, the leaves crunching beneath our boots as we ventured deeper into the woods. The air was alive with the sounds of nature, and the scent of pine filled our nostrils, invigorating us with the promise of adventure. As evening fell, we pitched our tents in a small clearing, surrounded by towering trees that seemed to whisper secrets to one another in the gentle breeze. We built a roaring fire, its warmth warding off the encroaching darkness, or so we thought. As night descended, a sense of unease settled over our camp. Strange noises echoed through the trees, and shadows danced on the periphery of our vision. We laughed nervously, dismissing our fears as mere figments of our imagination. But then the whispers began. At first, they were barely audible, just a faint murmur on the edge of hearing. We joked about ghosts and spirits, trying to lighten the mood, but the whispers grew louder and more insistent, filling the air with their sinister presence. I remember the fear that gripped my heart as the whispers surrounded us, their words unintelligible, but filled with a sense of foreboding. It was as though the very woods themselves were speaking to us, warning us of an unseen danger lurking in the darkness. And then it happened. One of my friends, let's call him Jake, claimed he saw something moving among the trees. He described it as a shadowy figure, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. We laughed it off as a trick of the firelight, but deep down, I think we all knew there was something out there, watching us from the shadows. As the night wore on, the whispers grew louder, their words becoming clearer and more menacing. They spoke of death and despair, of souls lost to the darkness of the woods, and with each passing moment, the feeling of dread that hung over our camp grew stronger. In the pale light of dawn, we packed up our gear and fled the woods, eager to escape the malevolent presence that lurked within. But even now, years later, I can't shake the feeling that we were not alone that night in Whispering Woods, that something sinister still waits among the trees, biding its time until it can claim its next victim. I hope you're ready for this because what I'm about to tell you is the most terrifying experience of my life. It happened a few years ago, but the memory still sends shivers down my spine whenever I think about it. It was a warm summer evening when I decided to take a solo camping trip in the remote wilderness of the Southwest. I've always been drawn to the beauty and solitude of nature, and I relished the opportunity to escape the hustle and bustle of city life for a few days. Little did I know, it would be a decision that would change my life forever. I found the perfect spot deep within the woods, far away from any signs of civilization. The sun was setting as I pitched my tent, casting a warm golden glow over the landscape. Everything seemed peaceful and serene, the only sounds the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze and the distant chirping of crickets. As night fell, I built a small campfire and settled in for the night, the crackling flames providing a comforting warmth against the chill of the evening air. I lay back, gazing up at the star-studded sky, feeling a sense of contentment wash over me. But as the hours passed and the darkness deepened, I began to feel a growing sense of unease. It started as a nagging feeling at the back of my mind, a primal instinct warning me of danger. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just my imagination running wild, but deep down I knew better. It was then that I heard a faint rustling in the bushes just beyond the edge of the campfire's glow. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest as I strained to listen. It sounded like footsteps, slow and deliberate, as if whatever was out there was trying to remain undetected. I reached for the flashlight beside me, my hands trembling as I flicked it on and aimed it towards the source of the sound. But as the beam of light pierced the darkness, I saw nothing but empty forest, the shadows dancing ominously among the trees. I told myself it was just a raccoon or a deer, but deep down, I knew it was something far more sinister. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that something was lurking in the darkness just beyond my line of sight. I tried to push the thoughts from my mind and focus on the warmth of the fire, but the feeling of unease only grew stronger with each passing moment. And then, just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, I heard a low, guttural growl that sent a chill down my spine. I scrambled to my feet, my heart racing as I scanned the darkness for any sign of movement. But all I saw was the stillness of the night, the only sound the pounding of my own heart in my ears. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a figure emerging from the shadows, its form shrouded in darkness. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, but as it drew closer, I realized it was something far more terrifying. It was like nothing I had ever seen before, a creature with the body of a wolf but the twisted, contorted features of a human. Its eyes gleamed with an otherworldly light, glowing a sickly yellow in the darkness. And as it stalked towards me, I knew I was face to face with a skinwalker. I wanted to run, to scream for help, but fear held me rooted to the spot. I could feel its gaze boring into me, stripping away my defenses until I was left exposed and vulnerable. And then, with a sudden burst of movement, it lunged towards me, its claws outstretched and gleaming in the firelight. I stumbled backward, tripping over a fallen log as I scrambled to escape its grasp. But before it could reach me, a deafening roar echoed through the forest, sending the creature recoiling in terror. I looked up to see a massive figure emerging from the shadows, its form towering over me like a protective guardian. It was a Navajo elder, armed with nothing but a ceremonial staff and a fierce determination to protect his land from the evil that lurked within. With a few swift movements, he banished the skinwalker back into the darkness from whence it came, leaving me shaken but unharmed. As the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, the elder turned to me with a solemn expression. "You are lucky to be alive," he said gravely. "Skinwalkers are ancient beings, powerful and cunning. You must be vigilant if you wish to survive in these lands." I nodded, my hands still trembling as I thanked him for saving my life. And as I packed up my camp and made my way back to civilization, I couldn't shake the feeling that the darkness of the wilderness held secrets far more terrifying than I could ever imagine. I want to preface this story by saying that what I'm about to tell you might sound unbelievable, but I swear every word is true. It's an experience that has haunted me since it happened, and even now, I can still feel the chill running down my spine as I recall the events of that fateful night. It was a cold autumn evening when it all began. I was driving home from a late shift at work, the empty country roads stretching out before me like ribbons of darkness. The only sound was the hum of my car engine and the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. As I rounded a bend in the road, something caught my eye, a figure standing at the edge of the forest, just beyond the reach of my headlights. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, a shadow cast by the trees. But as I drew closer, I realized it was something far more sinister. The figure was small, almost childlike, but there was something off about it. Its movements were jerky and unnatural, like a marionette being pulled by invisible strings. And its eyes, they glowed with an otherworldly light, piercing through the darkness like beacons of malevolence. I slowed the car to a stop, my heart pounding in my chest as I stared in horror at the creature before me. It seemed to be beckoning me, its hand outstretched in a silent invitation. But I knew deep down that whatever it was, it spelled danger. With trembling hands, I reached for my phone, intending to call for help. But as soon as I unlocked the screen, the figure vanished into the night, leaving behind nothing but the echo of its haunting gaze. I tried to shake off the feeling of dread that had settled over me like a suffocating blanket, telling myself it was just my imagination running wild. But deep down, I knew better. There was something out there, something dark and malevolent, lurking in the shadows. I continued on my way, my eyes darting nervously to the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the creature chasing after me. But the road remained empty, and soon I was pulling into my driveway, the safety of home just beyond reach. As I stepped out of the car, a sense of unease washed over me, like I was being watched from the darkness of the surrounding woods. I hurried inside, bolting the door behind me and drawing the curtains tight against the night. But even as I tried to convince myself that it was just a trick of the light, a figment of my overactive imagination, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was not alone. And when I finally mustered the courage to peer out the window, what I saw chilled me to the bone. Standing in the moonlit glow, just beyond the edge of the forest, were the figures of the children. Their eyes gleamed with an unnatural intensity, black as coal and devoid of any warmth or humanity. They stood perfectly still, watching me with a silent malevolence that sent shivers down my spine. I wanted to scream, to run, but fear held me rooted to the spot. I knew then that I was not dealing with ordinary children, but something far more sinister, something that belonged to the realm of nightmares. And as I watched, paralyzed with terror, the children began to move. With slow, deliberate steps, they advanced towards the house, their eyes never leaving mine. And though I knew I should have been calling for help, my voice was lost in a suffocating grip of fear. In that moment, I felt utterly helpless, at the mercy of forces beyond my comprehension. And as the children drew closer, their forms bathed in the eerie glow of the moon, I knew that I was about to become entangled in a nightmare from which there would be no escape. The cabin stood isolated amidst a sea of towering pines, its weather-beaten exterior blending seamlessly with the rugged landscape of the remote woods. As I approached, a shiver ran down my spine, a chill born not just from the biting wind but also from the eerie stillness that permeated the air. This was to be my sanctuary for the weekend, a chance to escape the chaos of the city and embrace the solitude of nature. I stepped inside, the creak of the door echoing through the empty space. The interior was quaint, with wooden beams stretching overhead and a crackling fireplace casting flickering shadows across the walls. It was cozy in an unsettling way, like the cabin itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to disturb the peace. I settled in quickly, unpacking my meager belongings and lighting a fire to ward off the encroaching cold. As night fell, I found myself drawn to the window, mesmerized by the dance of the stars against the velvet sky. But beneath the beauty of the wilderness lurked a sense of foreboding, a primal instinct warning me of the dangers that lurked in the darkness. Alone in the cabin, surrounded by miles of dense forest, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every sound seemed magnified, every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig sending my heart racing. I told myself it was just my imagination, that there was nothing to fear, but deep down, I knew better. As the hours passed, the wind outside grew fiercer, its mournful howls echoing through the trees like the wails of lost souls. I tried to distract myself, losing myself in a book or pacing the length of the cabin, but the sense of unease never left me. It clung to me like a second skin, a constant reminder of my vulnerability in this vast, unforgiving wilderness. And then, just as I was beginning to drift off to sleep, I heard a faint scratching at the door. My blood ran cold as I sat bolt upright, straining to listen over the pounding of my heart. Was it just the wind, or something more sinister? I crept towards the door, my hand trembling as I reached for the handle. With a deep breath, I flung it open, expecting to find nothing but darkness and emptiness. But instead, I was greeted by a pair of glowing eyes staring back at me from the shadows. I stumbled backward, my heart lodged in my throat as the creature stepped into the cabin. It was unlike anything I had ever seen, a twisted amalgamation of flesh and bone, its ragged fur bristling with menace. I tried to scream, to run, but my voice was caught in my throat and my legs refused to move. The creature advanced slowly, its eyes never leaving mine as it cornered me against the wall. I could smell its rancid breath, could feel the heat of its gaze burning into my soul. In that moment, I knew I was truly alone, at the mercy of something ancient and primal, something that belonged to the dark heart of the forest. But just as it lunged forward, its claws outstretched, a blinding light filled the cabin, banishing the darkness and sending the creature recoiling with a guttural roar. I shielded my eyes, blinking away the spots as a figure stepped into the room, brandishing a flashlight like a weapon. "Are you all right?" they asked, their voice steady despite the chaos unfolding around us. I nodded weakly, too stunned to speak as they helped me to my feet and ushered me towards the door. Together, we fled into the night, leaving the cabin and the creature behind us. As we emerged into the safety of the clearing, I glanced back at the cabin, its windows glowing like beacons in the darkness. And though I knew I would never return, a part of me couldn't help but wonder what other horrors lurked within the depths of the woods, waiting to be unleashed upon the unsuspecting souls who dared to wander too close. Hi, I'm not quite sure how to begin, but I'll give it a shot. This happened to me when I was 14 years old. It was just my mom and me. We moved around a lot because she always had to relocate for her job. I've stayed in many different places, but none of them compare to this one. Even the look of it gave me the creeps. The exterior resembled a place that hadn't been tended to in years. I looked around the neighborhood and all the other houses seemed well kept, but not this one. This place was a dump, and that's saying a lot because we once lived in a one-bedroom for 2 weeks that was full of holes and old stuff. But somehow, this place was even worse. I was expecting to see holes in the floor and peeling paint, but to my surprise, the inside was so nice. It looked like it had just been redone. I was shocked. I remember my mom saying they mostly didn't like to work on the front of the house, but she had no problem with it. Well, we got settled in for the first week or so. Everything was fine, nothing happened. But strangely, I always felt tired and sick for some reason. I'm not someone who gets sick easily, but one day it was so bad I could barely get out of bed. So I had to stay home from school. My mom didn't like me staying home alone, and since I didn't have a phone to call her, she really didn't like the idea. She said, "I'll be quick today, okay? I won't stay late." Oh boy, was she wrong. Later, she told me her boss dumped a lot of work on her last minute and she needed to get it done. But back to the story. She left for work and I went back to sleep, but I was awakened by the sounds of movement coming from outside my door. I called out, "Mom, is that you?" There was no answer, but when I looked at my clock, it was only 12 p.m. I tried to play it off, but then seconds went by and I heard footsteps on the stairs. Keep in mind, we had no pets and my mom wasn't home. Now, I didn't know if someone had broken into the house. I got up, walked over, and locked the door. In hindsight, that was a bad idea because whoever was in the house heard that and started pounding on the door and trying the lock. At this point, I just screamed, "I'm calling the cops." I knew it was a bluff, but I had to try, right? Luckily for me, one of my neighbors was home and saw this man enter my house through a window. He called the cops, and boy, was I happy to hear the sound of police cars later. My mom found out that this guy saw holes and thought the house was abandoned, and my neighbor saw him enter from a window. But why did he want to get into my room so badly? I'm just glad that my neighbor called the cops because I don't know if my door could have lasted much longer. After that, I got a phone. The clock struck midnight, echoing through the empty house like a mournful bell tolling for the dead. I sat alone in the dimly lit living room, the soft glow of the lamp casting long shadows across the walls. My parents had gone out for the evening, leaving me to fend for myself in our secluded home nestled deep within the woods. Normally, I relished the solitude, but tonight, a sense of unease hung heavy in the air. I tried to distract myself with a book, but the words blurred together, my mind unable to focus. Outside, the wind howled like a chorus of lost souls, and the branches scraped against the windows like skeletal fingers seeking entry. Each sound sent shivers down my spine, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I glanced nervously at the clock, willing time to move faster. But as the minutes dragged on, the silence of the house grew oppressive, suffocating me with its emptiness. Every creak of the floorboards made me jump, and I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, expecting to see something lurking in the shadows. I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination running wild, that there was nothing to fear. But deep down, I knew better. There was something in the house with me, something dark and malevolent, lurking just out of sight. I forced myself to get up and check the locks on the doors and windows, hoping to reassure myself that I was safe. But as I made my way through the darkened hallway, a chill ran down my spine, and I felt a presence behind me, its icy breath caressing the back of my neck. I whirled around, heart pounding, but there was nothing there. Just the empty hallway stretching out before me, shrouded in darkness. I shook my head, trying to dispel the feeling of dread that clung to me like a second skin, and continued on my way. Back in the living room, I sank onto the couch, wrapping myself in a blanket as if it could shield me from whatever lurked in the shadows. But the silence of the house was deafening, pressing down on me like a weight, suffocating me with its emptiness. And then, just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, I heard it, a soft, plaintive whisper, barely audible above the wind outside. My blood turned to ice in my veins as I strained to make out the words, my heart hammering in my chest. Help me, the voice whispered, its tone filled with agony and despair. Please help me. I froze, the sound sending chills down my spine. It sounded like it was coming from the basement, a place I had always avoided, convinced that it was haunted by something sinister. But despite my fear, I couldn't ignore the plea in the voice, couldn't turn my back on someone in need. With trembling hands, I made my way to the basement door, each step heavy with dread. The door creaked open on rusty hinges, revealing a yawning blackness that seemed to swallow the light. I hesitated on the threshold, the darkness pressing in around me like a living thing. And then, with a deep breath, I stepped inside. The air was thick and musty, filled with the scent of decay. I moved slowly, my footsteps echoing in the silence as I descended deeper into the darkness. The stairs seemed to go on forever, twisting and turning until I had lost all sense of direction. And then, at the bottom, I found it a small, cramped room filled with shadows and dust. And there, huddled in the corner, was a figure wrapped in tattered clothes, its face hidden in the darkness. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The figure lifted its head, revealing hollow eyes that gleamed in the darkness. And then, with a guttural growl, it lunged for me, its fingers stretching out like claws. I screamed, scrambling backward in terror, but it was too late. The thing was upon me, its icy grip wrapping around my throat, squeezing the life from me. And as the darkness closed in around me, I realized the true horror of the house. The emptiness wasn't just a lack of sound, it was a void filled with the souls of those who had been consumed by its darkness. And now, I was one of them. I was never the same when my parent found me the next day, always fearing the dark. It was a dark and stormy night. I sat alone in my creaky old house, the only company being the rhythmic pitter-patter of rain against the windows. The occasional flash of lightning illuminated the room, casting eerie shadows that danced on the walls. I tried to distract myself by reading a book, but the storm outside seemed to have seeped into my mind, filling it with an unshakable sense of unease. As the hours ticked by, the house grew quieter, amplifying every small noise. Each creak of the floorboards made my heart skip a beat. I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination running wild, but deep down I couldn't shake the feeling that I was not alone. Suddenly, I heard a faint whisper from the darkness beyond the hallway. It was so soft, I almost convinced myself I had imagined it. But then it came again, a low, sinister voice, calling my name. My pulse quickened as I sat frozen in fear. I knew I should have called someone, but the rational part of my brain insisted it was just my nerves playing tricks on me. I tried to brush it off and went back to my book, attempting to drown out the chilling whispers with the sound of my own voice as I read aloud. But the whispers persisted, growing louder and more insistent with each passing moment. They seemed to be coming from every corner of the house, surrounding me in a suffocating blanket of dread. I couldn't take it anymore. With trembling hands, I reached for my phone, intending to call for help. But as soon as I unlocked the screen, the whispers stopped abruptly, replaced by an eerie silence that was even more unnerving. That's when I heard it, a slow, deliberate tapping against the window. I turned slowly, my heart pounding in my chest, to see a figure standing outside in the pouring rain. It was too dark to make out any features, but I could feel its eyes boring into mine, sending shivers down my spine. I wanted to scream, to run, but fear had paralyzed me. I watched helplessly as the figure raised a hand and pressed it against the glass, leaving behind a foggy imprint that seemed to mock me. And then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure was gone, swallowed up by the darkness once more. I sat there, trembling and alone, the echoes of the whispers still lingering in my mind. With trembling hands, I dialed the emergency number, heart pounding as I awaited the reassuring voice on the other end. When the police arrived, they found nothing outside, no sign of anyone or anything. But as they swept through the house, their flashlights cutting through the darkness, they discovered something that chilled them to the bone, a message scrawled in the condensation on the window, just below the foggy handprint. "Your home is mine now, and I'll always be watching." From that day on, I never felt truly alone in that house again, haunted by the memory of the whispering shadows that had invaded my solitude. Thank you for listening. Like and subscribe.